Elias Jones received his new orders at dawn. The message arrived through a sealed priority channel that only a handful of human offices were supposed to know existed. The origin line had been deliberately stripped away, replaced by a security cipher older than most active agencies. All it said was that he was to report to Galactic Dominion Station immediately. For the first time in history, humans had accepted the Dominion's invitation to attend a council session as observers. Elias had learned long ago that service meant constant travel. One day he was stationed in one sector. The next he was deployed across the galaxy. The station itself was immense. It hung in deep space like a giant spinning tower, with specialized rings built for 43 separate alien species. Humans were not members of the Dominion. They were merely observers, and Elias felt that divide the moment he arrived. After his clearance papers were checked, security sent him down to the crowded lower levels reserved for non-member species. His aide, Lauren Trell, met him in the corridor. Lauren was not human. She belonged to the Valari, a quiet species respected across the Dominion for their expertise in law, procedure, and ancient council rules. Assigned as a Dominion liaison, Lauren was there to guide Elias through his historic first assignment. "Elias?" Lauren asked, stepping forward with a formal bow. "I am Lauren Trell, your Dominion liaison for this session. I will guide you through council procedure." Elias studied her for a moment, then gave a polite nod. "Good. I have a feeling I'm going to need one." Lauren glanced toward the distant lifts leading up to the apex chamber. "Today, Elias, I suspect everyone will." As they walked, Lauren tapped her datapad, trying to open the diplomat's background files. Her brow tightened. "That is strange," she admitted. "The system is blocking almost everything." She looked up at Elias. "Your career history is covered by high-level security overrides. I cannot access most of it." Elias stopped in the corridor and studied the alien liaison. "Don't worry about it," he said quietly. "Some parts of human history are better left unread." Lauren held his gaze for a second, then nodded and adjusted her robes. "Understood, Elias. The heavy lift to the High Council is this way." High Arbiter Marvek stood at the center of the hovering apex bench. The moment he took his place, the great chamber quieted around him. The High Arbiter was a representative of the Koran race. He was remarkably tall and almost skeletal, built with a stretched torso and exceptionally long limbs. His four-fingered hands moved over the controls with deliberate grace. His large glassy eyes scanned the various delegation areas, reflecting the shifting light of the central projector. His bioluminescent robes shimmered with subtle color each time he adjusted the console before him. The High Arbiter raised one long hand and activated the central microphone. His words immediately broadcast across the chamber, translated into hundreds of galactic languages at once. Elias heard the translation in his earpiece, announcing that the Galactic Dominion Council was officially in session. Even through the digital filter, the natural resonance of the High Arbiter's deep voice vibrated straight through the floorboards. The broadcast continued, stating that the assembly would begin with the urgent business of the Outer Rim territories. Beside Elias, Lauren leaned in close and whispered, "Be careful, Elias. The High Arbiter may look calm, but he is ruthless with chamber procedure." Elias kept his eyes on the apex bench. "How ruthless?" he asked quietly. Lauren's voice tightened. "Ruthless enough to reduce a delegation's air supply by 5% if they take the floor out of turn. Just to make a point." The liaison's eyes flicked toward the lower left tier, noting that the Varkon delegation looked ready to boil over. The room grew tense instantly. From the center of the Varkon section, their lead representative slammed a heavy clawed fist onto the console. The holographic projector on the central floor flashed a violent amber hue as they forcibly overrode the speaker queue. The Varkon ambassador barked an angry demand through the translator, sending a guttural sound vibrating right through the glass of the observer gallery. "The Dominion feeds us nothing but patience while our home hives suffocate," he shouted. "The borders drawn 3 cycles ago are dead. We require worlds. We require mass. And we have already found an unaligned star system too weak to refuse us." Suddenly, the central holographic projector shifted. The old star maps dissolved, replaced instantly by a spinning, brilliantly clear 3-dimensional model of the Sol system. Earth glowed blue and fragile right in the center of the display. Lauren went completely rigid beside Elias, all the color drained from the alien liaison's face. She leaned closer and whispered, "This is not an open threat, Elias. It is an official petition." Elias kept his eyes fixed on the spinning blue image of his home planet. "What exactly are they petitioning for?" he asked, his voice entirely too calm. Lauren noticed the lack of fear immediately. Most diplomats would have been shouting in panic by now, yet Elias only watched Earth turn in the hologram, looking as if some part of him had been waiting for this exact moment. Lauren swallowed hard. "The Varkon are moving to claim Earth," she said. Elias did not look away from the projection. Lauren's voice dropped even lower. "Humanity is not a registered Dominion member, so the Council's overarching laws do not fully protect Earth's borders." Elias finally glanced at her. "So to them, we are unprotected." Lauren hesitated, then nodded. "To many members of the Council, yes. But listen to how the Varkon speak. They speak constantly of need, and their only answer is expansion." Lauren's voice stayed low as she continued. "The Varkon look out at weaker star systems and see food, land, water, and minerals instead of living people. Even their own established colonies stand as grim warnings, showing once fertile planets stripped entirely down to dust." The High Arbiter raised a long, four-fingered hand from the apex bench. His expression remained perfectly serene, his massive eyes blinking slowly as he looked from the aggressive Varkon warrior to the projection of Earth below. The High Arbiter noted that the Sol system remained classified as non-member sovereign space, his elegant robes catching the blue light of the hologram. The High Arbiter's deep voice carried across the chamber as he addressed the assembly. "The situation is regrettable," he stated, "but under the strict rules of the Dominion Charter, member expansion into unaligned sectors may proceed once a statistical resource crisis has been proven." His massive eyes turned back toward the lower tier. "Ambassador Tessius, you may present your case for total annexation." A loud trumpet blast cut sharply through the chamber. The sound was so sudden that even the aggressive Varkon ambassador froze in place. The image of Earth flickered, casting blue light across the shocked faces in the Great Hall. The reinforced doors of the apex chamber hissed open. Keel Royal Guards marched in first, their armor polished to a mirror sheen, their synchronized steps striking the dark mineral floor like a heavy drumbeat. Behind them came Queen Nara, sovereign of the Galactic Dominion and absolute ruler of the Keel Empire. She did not need to raise her voice, signal for silence, or announce her authority. The room yielded to her instantly. Her formal name was Naravi, but she preferred Nara. Naravi was the name others had tried to turn into a chain, but that name had always belonged to her alone. Queen Nara moved through the assembly with calm, absolute control. She did not rush her stride, nor did she need to voice a command. Her mere presence made the entire room obey. Still, a distinct warmth lingered behind her dark eyes, the unmistakable look of someone who had protected vulnerable worlds for a very long time. Striking black hair framed her pale, elegant face. Her gaze seemed to carefully measure everyone in the massive chamber, while the slight points of her ears proudly displayed her royal Keel blood. She wore a flowing dark blue dress that seemed woven from midnight starlight, its fabric deepening into black with every graceful movement she made. One by one, every representative in the assembly rose to their feet, including the Varkon. Their hostile ambassador, Tessius, kept his shoulders incredibly stiff and his anger entirely clear, but he followed protocol nonetheless. Up in the glass-shielded observer gallery, Elias also stood watching. Queen Nara's gaze moved deliberately across the amphitheater, scanning the upper tiers before halting completely. For one brief second, her dark eyes locked directly onto him. Something entirely unreadable passed across her face, a flash of recognition, or perhaps the memory of something far older, before she turned her attention back toward the apex bench. Beside Elias, Lauren bowed her head so quickly she nearly bumped against the protective glass. She elbowed the human diplomat with urgent, barely controlled panic and whispered, "Bow immediately, Elias. That is Queen Nara, absolute ruler of the entire empire. She has kept peace in this sector longer than most species have kept written records. If she issues an order, the entire council obeys." Her eyes flicked toward the lower tier. "If she is here, the whole board just reset." At the apex bench, the High Arbiter folded his elongated torso into a deep bow. He was no longer the highest authority in the room. He was merely the officer of the session, and his sovereign had arrived. A heavy silence settled completely over the apex chamber. Only after Queen Nara took her central seat did the representatives follow, dropping back into their places in a wave of rustling robes and carefully controlled fear. Ambassador Theseus bowed his heavily armored head. He muttered through the translator, "Her Majesty honors the chamber with her presence." His predatory eyes remained fixed and tense. Queen Nara leaned back with effortless composure, one slender hand resting gently on the arm of her seat. Her full attention settled directly on Theseus, and the entire chamber seemed to contract around that single look. A small smile touched her mouth, as if she had seen far louder threats from much smaller minds. Queen Nara's voice remained calm and unamplified, yet it carried clearly to every corner of the massive hall as she fixed her gaze on Theseus. "Ambassador Theseus, I am going to stop you from making a very old mistake. Because I am in a generous mood, I will do it before that mistake becomes too expensive for your people. The Sol system is completely off limits. It has been off limits since long before this council learned to call itself a government." A collective murmur rippled through the delegation sections. Theseus's jaw parted just enough to expose rows of sharp, predatory teeth. At the center of the floor, Earth continued to spin in absolute blue silence. No longer a target, but a warning that no one in the room truly understood. The High Arbiter blinked his massive, glassy eyes and leaned forward from the apex bench. "I find no record in the archives of any protectorate or treaty involving the Sol sector," he said carefully. Then he turned toward the shadowed side of the apex bench. "Keeper, is there any historical record of a keel claim over Sol?" A quiet figure stepped out from the shadowed side of the apex bench. He wore silver-black robes marked with ancient archival seals, and his clouded eyes did not focus on anyone. Lauren's breath caught in the gallery. She leaned toward Elias and whispered, "That is the keeper of the ancient archive, one of the last of the Topens race. The Topens were legendary archivists who existed before the Dominion. They gave up their sight so the historical horrors they preserved would not destroy their minds. They move entirely by memory, duty, and the scent of every species in this chamber." The keeper bowed first to Queen Nara, then turned his blind face toward the entire chamber. His dry, solemn voice carried through the translator. "Members of the council, there is no record of a keel claim over the Sol system. No protectorate, no treaty, no off-limits order issued by the Keel Empire. The archive holds no evidence that the Keel ever marked Earth as theirs to guard, rule, or command." Queen Nara looked up to the High Arbiter with a faint smirk. "Correct, Keeper. The Keel Empire is not protecting Earth, claiming Earth, or marking Earth off-limits." Her gaze shifted toward the glowing blue planet turning in the center of the chamber. "Earth did that entirely on its own. And if I could claim credit for something that impressive, I certainly would." Queen Nara's gaze remained on the glowing projection of Earth as she continued, her voice calm but edged with ancient warning. "I have watched humans choose to remain on one single world. I have watched them keep peace by asking for nothing but distance. As long as no one bothered them, everything remained perfectly peaceful. I have spent ages keeping this sector calm, and I would prefer not to see it ruined by someone mistaking quiet for weakness." Then she turned her gaze broadly across the chamber. "Tell me, Council, what happens if we are not actually the oldest species in this galaxy?" Queen Nara looked directly at Ambassador Theseus first, then back at the High Arbiter. Slowly, she lifted one slender finger toward the observer gallery. "I want the human standing there brought down to the floor," she said. Her gaze remained steady on the apex bench. "Arbiter, grant him passage." The High Arbiter nodded, signaling the guards stationed near the glass enclosure. "Bring the human down to the floor immediately," he ordered. Up in the observer gallery, Lauren turned her head slowly toward Elias, her face pale and her voice trembling. "Elias," she whispered, "what is going on? What is she talking about? What exactly are humans?" Elias did not answer. He only lowered his eyes to the floor below, his expression completely unreadable as he prepared to step out into the light. Elias Jones stepped out of the dim gallery and onto the anti-gravity transit platform. It glided smoothly down through the wide-open space of the chamber, carrying him directly to the hard council floor. He stopped a few paces away from Queen Nara. Up close, her presence felt even more overwhelming. The subtle scent of ozone and exotic stellar blossoms surrounded her. She offered Elias a knowing smile, her sharp eyes bright with amusement and genuine kindness. "Thank you for coming down, Mr. Jones," Queen Nara said, her elegant voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater. Elias met her gaze calmly. "Your Majesty," he replied. She did not address him by his assigned title of observer, nor did she refer to him as an ambassador. She simply called him Mr. Jones. The title was so plain that it should have meant absolutely nothing. Yet the precise way Queen Nara spoke it made the entire chamber uneasy. Across the assigned sections, translation programs hesitated, searching for an associated rank, office, or legal meaning, and coming up entirely empty. Even the representatives of the oldest species looked confused. Whatever the title Mr. Jones meant to the Queen, it was completely absent from any public dominion law. Queen Nara's smile faded slightly as she studied him. "Does the Vault of the Deep still exist, Mr. Jones?" she asked softly. Elias did not bow to the sovereign. He simply looked back at her, calm and unreadable, showing no trace of disrespect. Queen Nara laughed softly, not out of mockery, but like someone who had just received the exact answer she expected. "So it does," she murmured. Elias reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a coin. He did not offer a word of explanation. Instead, he simply extended his hand, holding it out toward the keeper of the ancient archive. The keeper froze instantly. His blind face turned sharply toward the metal, as if he could feel it burning in the diplomat's hand. When he reached out to touch it, his long fingers trembled violently. A collective murmur spread rapidly through the chamber, causing Ambassador Tessius to snap his heavy jaws shut. The Varkon demanded to know exactly what the keeper was holding. The keeper cradled the coin with both hands, his voice shaking with deep emotion as he addressed the entire assembly. "Hear me, members of the council. This is a coin, the only one in existence. The archive does not name the hands that forged it, the full rite that awakened it, or every secret bound inside it. The keepers of the archive only know that when the coin is presented, it must be obeyed as written archive law. Its authority cannot be questioned, amended, delayed, or challenged." The keeper slowly turned the coin in his trembling hands and raised it slightly for the chamber to witness. "On one side is ancient Earth, and on its reverse," he continued, "there are 43 impressions, one for each founding species represented in this chamber. I do not know who carved them. I only know that each mark is real, each mark is recognized by archive law, and each mark binds this council to the coin's authority." The delegation section stirred even louder. A voice called down from the upper tiers, demanding to know what power the coin possessed. The keeper lowered his head respectfully toward Elias, then addressed the shouting crowd again. "This coin does not open a physical door," he said. "It establishes jurisdiction and power. The true bearer of this coin holds authority over archive truth itself." The keeper continued. "Any historical record the bearer confirms, rejects, corrects, or speaks directly into must be treated by law as verified fact. So long as this coin recognizes Mr. Jones, anything he speaks within this chamber carries that same unassailable weight. It cannot be challenged." The keeper then lifted his blind face toward Elias, still cradling the coin with reverent caution. "Mr. Jones," he asked, his voice low enough that the translator almost seemed to hesitate, "may I hold the coin a little longer?" Elias studied him for a moment, smiled, then he gave a single, calm nod. The entire chamber plunged into absolute silence. Queen Nara's knowing smile widened into a look of dangerous amusement as she addressed the chamber. "Members of the council, pay very close attention. You are about to receive a history lesson that will make many of your oldest records look painfully vague. The ancient people of Kalira forged that coin and bound it to one human bloodline, granting that line total authority over archive truth while sealing the coin's deeper secrets. No one in this chamber, other than Mr. Jones, has the authority to open those secrets or challenge the authority the coin confers. With that in mind, the floor belongs entirely to Mr. Jones." Elias took a slow, measured breath as hundreds of alien eyes tracked his every movement. "I find it ironic," he began, his voice steady, "that you call this grand hall the apex chamber. To your member cultures, that word means the highest attribute or political power. To humanity, it means something remarkably close. It means a top predator. He paused for a moment, letting the heavy silence stretch across the chamber. Then he looked at the tiers of the 43 delegation sections. Long ago, this galaxy was haunted by three supreme apex civilizations, he continued. Together, the ancient worlds knew them as the apex terror. They were unimaginably cruel. They took whatever they desired and destroyed anything they could not control. One day, their crosshairs locked onto the Sol system. Behind him, the central hologram shifted, displaying pale warships hanging over the smoking ruins of conquered worlds. Elias lifted one hand toward the image. The first faction was the Galactic Dominion, he said. They believed absolute control was a form of kindness. They did not always execute people. Instead, they slowly altered a culture until the survivors forgot who they used to be. The holographic image changed immediately, revealing massive black fleets surrounding burning stars. The second faction was the Syndral Swarms, Elias continued, a living hunger guided by a singular intellect. They consumed metal, atmosphere, oceans, and living worlds, turning everything they touched into raw fuel for the next wave of attacks. The hologram filled with sharp, twisted starships, and Elias's voice grew noticeably harder. The third faction was the Orath Ascendancy. They used advanced science strictly as a weapon. They studied pain, mortality, and fear. They did not conquer star systems to govern them. They conquered them to experiment on the living populations. He allowed the three terrifying images to hover together above the floor. Separately, they were galactic nightmares, Elias said. Combined, they formed the unstoppable apex terror. The Ver enslaved what could be managed, the Syndral consumed what could not, and the Orath experimented on whatever survived the slaughter. Elias adjusted his suit and stepped closer to the primary projector. The model of the Sol system shifted again, uncovering deep layers of heavily classified, ancient data. When the Terror first arrived at our borders 10,000 years ago, humanity was still young as a spacefaring civilization, he said. We had only recently mastered faster-than-light travel. Our defensive shields were new, our weapons were experimental, and our fleets were incredibly small. By the legal standards of this modern council, we looked completely defenseless. Elias turned his sharp gaze directly toward Ambassador Tessius. The apex terror expected an easy, profitable hunt, he said, his voice lowering until it cut through the chamber like a chilled blade. But humans were never the physically strongest creatures. We were never the fastest. We have no natural armor, no claws, no venom, and no wings. On Earth, our own home planet tried to kill us every single day through brutal storms, extreme elements, famine, and native predators. Because Earth gave us no easy path, we adapted and we learned to survive. He took one decisive step forward, and the floor seemed to swallow the ambient light around his black shoes. Understand this, Elias said. Humanity knew they were coming. We knew exactly what the Terror was and what it had done to the rest of the galaxy. We understood what would happen to Earth if the enemy reached our homeworld unprepared. Fixing his eyes on the Varkon ambassador, Elias declared, when the enemy fleet finally arrived, humanity did not offer negotiations. We gave them total war. A collective shudder passed instantly through the tiered sections of the 43-member species. Even the battle-hardened Varkon warriors seemed to physically shrink back into their high seats. Elias let the silence settle before continuing. Earth's definition of total war was chillingly simple. If an enemy attacked humanity without just cause, our military did not stop fighting when the enemy retreated. We only stopped when the aggressor was completely incapable of ever threatening another living soul. Old classified battle data flickered to life within the hologram, and Elias continued. We did not merely push the apex terror out of the Sol system. We shattered their empires. We obliterated their fleets, destroyed their strongholds, and erased the hidden bastions where they built ships and stored historical records. That is why your oldest archives contain no mention of those three factions. Humanity personally ensured that almost nothing was left of them. Elias turned slowly, his eyes sweeping across the entire Dominion Council before landing back on Ambassador Tessius. We chose to isolate ourselves on one single world Because we understood the horrific cost of that level of violence, he said. After the war, humanity locked its planet-killing weapons away in the vault of the deep and chose to reset its own public society. We chose a quiet path of peace while the rest of the galaxy grew. But if anyone sends warships into the Sol system, the ancient vault of the deep will open, and humanity will finish what it started generations ago. Mr. Jones did not explain how he knew the hidden vault still existed, nor did he reveal who had trusted him with its secret name. Looking around the grand hall, no one in the chamber was brave enough to ask. Only then did the council truly begin to comprehend the situation. The small, unaligned species they had viewed as an easy target was actually something much older, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous than any empire in attendance. Queen Nara did not press him for further details. That silence, more than any piece of evidence, confirmed the absolute truth to the room. Even the sovereign of the Galactic Dominion acknowledged there were certain questions that only Mr. Jones had the right to leave unanswered. Beside the central floor, Queen Nara released a soft, delighted laugh, resting her chin thoughtfully on one slender hand. The High Arbiter slowly rested his hands on his command console, in deep reverence and absolute terror. His voice shook noticeably through the translator as he addressed the tiers. Ambassador Tessius, by authority of this council, the Varkon petition for the Sol system is officially and permanently withdrawn, effective immediately. The entire Apex chamber descended into a stunned, breathless silence. No one dared to move or speak. Queen Nara slowly rose from her seat. As the assembly watched, a single shimmering tear escaped her sharp eyes and tracked down her beige skin. She looked at Elias, her voice thick with genuine, deep emotion. "You have honored your ancestors today, Mr. Jones." Then she turned away from him, sweeping her brilliant gaze across the terrified delegation sections. Queen Nara continued, "My people suffered brutally under the Apex terror," she declared, her voice turning remarkably hard. "The Keel were being erased when Earth intervened. Your records call it liberation. I remember it as survival. My people made a sacred promise that day. One day we would repay that debt." Her eyes settled directly on Ambassador Tessius. "When I learned of your plan to invade Earth, I remembered that promise. I remembered the great warships of Earth breaking through the smoke. I remembered the human warrior who pulled me from the ruins. And I knew I could not remain silent." Her voice sharpened. "If you had sent even one warship toward Earth, my empire would have annihilated your fleet before it ever reached human borders." Her dark eyes narrowed in judgment. "You are not the Apex terror yet, Ambassador," she said, "but your civilization is walking directly toward that same path. You speak constantly of survival, yet you teach yourselves to steal worlds from populations you believe cannot resist. That is how every galactic terror begins." Then Queen Nara looked back toward Elias, her voice softening noticeably. "That is why I arranged for humanity to be invited to this session today," she said. "I knew the Varkon were secretly preparing this annexation petition. Peace built on ignorance is fragile, but now the Council has heard the truth." The High Arbiter bowed so low that his forehead nearly touched his command console. Across the massive chamber, representatives from the older alien cultures, those who still possessed fragments of ancient stories buried deep within their archives, lowered their heads in unison. They were not bowing to the authority of their queen. They were bowing directly to Mr. Jones. Elias stood completely motionless at the dead center of the floor. He had entered the station as a quiet, unaligned observer from a crowded lower-level sector. Now the entire chamber looked down at him as if a heavily sealed ancient door had finally opened, allowing something long forgotten to step back into the light. Then the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Elias stared back at Queen Nara, who stood before him, with her composure finally broken. His diplomatic mask cracked completely. In a low tone, he said, "Oh my God, you were there!" Queen Nara kept her head bowed, her shoulders trembling slightly. She gave a small, fragile nod of confirmation. "Yes," she said softly, her voice echoing clearly in the dead-silent chamber. "I was there. I was nothing but a child at the time. I am the oldest living Keel in existence, Mr. Jones. I have watched 10,000 years pass over this galaxy. I am older than most Dominion records themselves." She lifted her eyes toward him, bright with grief and memory. Before the creation of the ancient archive, my people served as living recorders of galactic events. The archive remembers what was written, Mr. Jones. I remember what actually happened. Elias searched her sharp, dark eyes, trying to mentally bridge the impossible distance between human memory and living history. Queen Nara slowly raised her head and offered him a bittersweet, ancient smile. My kind age at an incredibly slow rate, she explained. We are not completely immortal, but our bodies were biologically shaped to protect historical memory over impossible spans of time. To my people, the Great Liberation War is not an ancient myth. It is a vivid memory from our own existence. I still remember the sky burning and the ships of Earth breaking through the clouds. Looking directly at Elias, she said, "The moment I saw your face in the observer gallery, I recognized the genetic lineage that once stood between my people and absolute extinction." A collective murmur of profound awe moved swiftly through the 43 delegation sections. For the first time in history, the council looked at Queen Nara not merely as their political sovereign, but as a living witness to the war. Ambassador Tessius looked as if he wanted to physically disappear into the floor. The High Arbiter rose slowly at the apex bench, his arms trembling with emotion. Addressing the human with profound reverence, he said, "Mr. Jones, the lower-level quarters initially assigned to you are a grave insult to the history of the galaxy. By order of the Council, the Grand Luxury Embassy of the Apex Spires is now yours, along with our formal request for your presence at every future session." Then Elias did something so quietly and traditionally human that a ripple of awe moved through the alien tears. He reached calmly into his suit pocket, drew out a crisp white handkerchief, and gently offered it to the sovereign of the Keel Empire. Queen Nara looked down at the small piece of cloth, a look of surprise softening her royal face. A warm smile finally broke through her grief. She accepted the handkerchief and gently dabbed her dark eyes. Elias politely inclined his head toward the apex bench. "Thank you, Arbiter," he said, "but the embassy will not be necessary." Then he turned his attention back to Queen Nara, his posture perfectly respectful but entirely unawed by her immense royal power. "Your Majesty, would you be willing to tell me your story when this session is over?" Queen Nara carefully tucked the human handkerchief into a fold of her ceremonial gown, placing it right over her heart. She replied softly, "I would be deeply honored, Mr. Jones. The lower levels are crowded and noisy. My private royal flagship is anchored in the upper docking rings, where it is quiet. Join me after the session concludes. We have 10,000 years of catching up to do." The High Arbiter remained frozen on his platform, fully realizing that while the human diplomat had just declined the Council's official luxury, he had seamlessly secured a direct, private line to the most powerful sovereign in the galaxy. Up in the glass-shielded gallery, Lauren leaned over the structural railing, stunned into silence. Elias caught his aide's eye from below and gave her a subtle, reassuring nod. The message was clear enough. They would definitely not be returning to the lower levels. Lauren looked down at the heavily sealed file on her datapad. A single, highly classified line of text had unlocked during Elias's history lesson. It did not list a standard diplomatic rank or bureaucratic office. Instead, the screen simply displayed Elias Jones, custodian of the Vault of the Deep in the Sol System archives. A second later, the security markers flashed, and the file sealed itself back into total encryption. The royal flagship of the Keel Empire was nothing like the crowded lower levels, where Elias had been placed when he first arrived at the station. The grand hallways were perfectly quiet, and Elias could clearly hear the steady rhythm of his own footsteps echoing beside his royal escorts. Queen Nara received him in a private observation chamber overlooking the vast expanse of Dominion space. The chamber walls were lined with living crystal that pulsed faintly with a soft, blue-white light. No ministers waited there, nor were there any high admirals or formal translators present to announce her every word. For the first time since she had entered the apex chamber, Queen Nara looked less like the supreme ruler of an empire and more like a solitary witness carrying a memory far too heavy to ever set down. Beyond the protective glass, distant stars stretched across the vast star field, but Queen Nara looked through them as if she could still see the skies of another world burning long ago. She began her story softly. I was born long before the Dominion even had a name. I existed before this station was built, before the treaties were signed, and before the grand titles everyone now uses to hide what they truly want. My homeworld was called Kalira back then. It was a vibrant green planet filled with warm air and the loud crash of native oceans. I remember believing the sky above me was endless. Her voice tightened slightly, though she kept her eyes fixed firmly on the distant stars. The apex terror arrived without warning. At first, they only studied us. They counted our populations and watched what our bodies could survive. Then they landed. Their colossal machines blacked out the sky, and our proud cities fell silent one by one. The elders were executed. The children were marked for forced labor or immediate death. By the time I understood what mortality meant, I had already seen far too much of it. Elias offered no interruption. He had heard human war veterans speak exactly like this before, conveying their trauma not through grand theatrical drama, but through the terrible, quiet restraint of someone who survived simply because others did not. Queen Nara continued, "My mother hid me beneath the heavy foundation stones of our royal palace. There were 7 of us trapped in the dark, all children of the final royal bloodline. We were ordered not to cry, not to speak, and not to breathe too sharply whenever the enemy hunting drones passed overhead. For 9 agonizing days, the ground shook without stopping. On the 10th day, the palace above us collapsed into ruin. We thought that sound was the end of the world, but it was not the end. It was the sound of the human military entering the atmosphere." The living crystal on the chamber walls suddenly glowed brighter, reflecting her thoughts. A faint visual memory materialized in the air, depicting thick black clouds, burning structural towers, and enemy war machines marching through a landscape of ash. Then immaculate white human starships broke through the heavy smoke like a brilliant sunrise, Queen Nara said. To my young eyes, they did not look like ordinary warriors. To a child in the ruins, they looked like fallen stars coming down to heal the ground. Their armor was white, their massive ships were white, and their battle banners bore the image of a blue world encircled by a golden laurel. I remember one human warrior lifting a massive block of rubble with a machine I thought was pure magic. Queen Nara continued, "The warrior found us beneath the shattered stones. Then the warrior removed the heavy helmet, and for the first time, we saw her face." Queen Nara closed her eyes against the memory. She smiled down at me and told us we were safe. I did not know the human language then, and my translation device had been destroyed in the bombing, but somehow I understood the comfort in her message anyway. Elias felt a sudden tightness in his chest. "Do you know her name?" he asked. Queen Nara opened her eyes. "Captain Elias Jones of the United Earth Corps," she said. "She died 3 days later, holding the Western Evacuation Corridor against the final ground swarm of the Apex Terror." Elias took a small device out of his jacket pocket and whispered, "Display Captain Elias Jones during the Apex Terror conflict." A thin, concentrated beam of blue light rose smoothly from the device, unfolding into a small, perfectly detailed hologram above his hand. A brave woman clad in the distinctive white armor of the United Earth Corps appeared in the light, her helmet tucked securely under one arm and her face entirely calm despite the backdrop of smoke and fire behind her. For the very first time since Elias had entered the private room, Queen Nara made a sound that was not carefully controlled, royal, or ancient. It was a broken, gasping breath. Her hand rose swiftly to her mouth. "It is truly her," she whispered. Looking at the light, she cried out, "After all this time, she looks exactly as I remember her." For a brief moment, Elias no longer saw the station as a monument to alien power. He saw it as an empire built in the long shadow of a sacrifice Earth had deliberately chosen never to preserve in its own public history. Queen Nara turned to him. "Your ancestors were far wiser than my own people, Mr. Jones," she said softly. "The ancient humans understood what blind devotion would do to the galaxy and what unchecked fear would do to their own humanity. So they gave up their ultimate power and sealed everything away." Queen Nara continued, "Humanity chose to forget because remembering that terrifying level of violence too clearly would have permanently corrupted what your civilization became. Your ancient people left my people with a single command: build something better. I have spent my entire life trying to keep that command alive. She turned completely away from the viewport to face him fully. Mr. Jones, I am aware of the flaws within the Dominion. It is proud, fearful, tangled in bureaucracy, and far too often cruel to those it claims to protect. Your people ended the nightmare, then stepped away and left the liberated worlds free to decide what kind of galaxy they wanted to become. Elias exhaled slowly. The galaxy does not need humanity, Your Majesty. It needs to remember why humanity chose to leave in the first place. Elias studied the ancient sovereign for a brief moment. Your Majesty, may I share a personal thought? Queen Nara nodded. Naravi is an undeniably beautiful name, Elias said. What the invaders did to your childhood did not give them ownership over your identity. A cruel hand can misuse a name, but it can never decide what that name means. Only the person who carries the name has that power. For a long time, Queen Nara remained completely silent. Perhaps one day I will choose to be Naravi again, simply because it is my choice to make. Elias remained quiet as the realization settled between them. Then he straightened his posture. Humanity will never join the Galactic Dominion. We will not join as members, and we will certainly not become just another voice in a chamber already crowded with ancient fears. Earth wants exactly what it has always asked for, to be left entirely alone. He held her gaze steadily and continued. Humans learned long ago that our true power is safest when it is not seated at the political table. We will trade with other worlds if we choose to do so. We will listen when genuine wisdom is offered, and we will speak when silence would cost innocent lives. We will remain exactly what we chose to be, quiet, independent, but if another great terror ever rises and the galaxy truly needs us again, Earth will be ready. The words settled heavily between them like a sacred sealed oath. Queen Nara bowed her head respectfully toward him, not acting as a queen commanding a subject, but rather as an equal honoring another. Perhaps because of that promise, she said softly, the galaxy may sleep a little easier tonight. As Elias finally left Queen Nara's private chamber and made his way back toward the station's departure corridors, the unique coin sensed its custodian moving away. Its advanced internal security protocols triggered, and the coin instantly teleported back into his suit pocket, executing the movement silently. It was an impossible piece of ancient technology, explicitly designed to remain with its rightful custodian, eternally bound to the Jones family line through blood and genetic code. Elias did not visually witness the event occur. He only felt the familiar, heavy weight suddenly return to his fabric, cold and reassuring, as if the coin had never truly belonged anywhere else in the universe. Far away, well beyond the reach of the Dominion maps, hidden deep beneath the forgotten oceans of Earth, the massive vault of the deep waited in absolute silence. And among the select human family trusted to guard its secrets across the generations, one specific name had never been removed from the oldest records of the world: Jones. Later, Queen Nara summoned Ambassador Theseus to a private chamber. The ambassador entered with stiff formality and bowed his armored head. Your Majesty, how may I serve? Queen Nara looked at Theseus for a long moment before answering. You have one choice left, Ambassador. Listen, accept help and lead your people away from conquest, or keep walking toward a war your people will not survive. Theseus kept his eyes lowered. What kind of help, Your Majesty? Queen Nara lifted one hand and a massive star map unfolded above them, glowing with dozens of quiet star systems marked in soft green light. These worlds are empty, she said. Their soil can be restored, their water can be renewed, and their stars are stable enough for long-term settlement. Theseus raised his head slightly. Why offer this to us after what we tried to do, Your Majesty? Queen Nara's expression did not soften. Because your people are hungry, Ambassador, and hunger is not a crime. But using that hunger as an excuse to steal living worlds from weaker civilizations is. The Dominion will help the Varkon build new homes if they choose cooperation. That is the only path I am placing before you. Theseus lowered his head again. What do you want in return, Your Majesty? Queen Nara leaned forward, her voice calm and final. Ask before you take, build before you conquer, and remember that mercy is being offered only once. Later, the blind keeper stood alone in the dark expanse of the ancient archive. Before the master record console, His hands trembled as he realized the unique coin had vanished from his grasp because it had sensed its custodian leaving, activating its security protocols. Yet the distinct texture of those 43 marks remained permanently etched in his memory. Slowly and carefully, the old archivist entered an entirely new, classified record under the Sol system. The entry recorded Mr. Jones's testimony as verified archive law. The Sol system was strictly off-limits. Humanity was not to be disturbed, and humans are at the top of the apex chain. After the final echoes of the historic session had faded from the corridors, Lauren Trell was summoned to the High Arbiter's private office. She entered carefully, expecting punishment for what had happened in the chamber. The High Arbiter stood behind his command console, the Dominion seal glowing across his massive, glassy eyes. "Lauren Trell," the High Arbiter said, "you have been reassigned to my personal office, effective immediately." Lauren froze. "To your office, High Arbiter?" "Yes," the High Arbiter replied. "The recommendation came directly from Mr. Jones." Lauren's mouth opened, but no sound came out. After a moment, she bowed quickly. "I understand, High Arbiter." She turned to leave, but before her long fingers reached the door control, the High Arbiter spoke again. "Lauren," she froze in the doorway, "do not disappoint Mr. Jones.